Hey everybody, this is Daleo, your boy Daleo, and I kind of wanted to do a new format for making videos. Um, this is definitely a new way to do it. I kind of figured, most of the video blogs that I've made were on really crappy phones, and you could hardly see me anyways. I wasn't really looking at the camera, and all I really wanted to do was talk anyways, because talking was the primary need that I had for videos. So I'm going to try this new format, and this is sort of a test just to see how things go. And also at the same time, this is sort of an update on what I want from this channel, what I want for myself, and the current progress on the games. For those of you who haven't been keeping up, uh, and for the people that are utterly confused because they don't really know what's going on with all the changes. We used to be Catboy Games, and that was how we first started. We made Rocket Brigade as well as a few other phone app related things, and we worked on several projects together. Me and my brother did, and we're kind of moving on from that. I mean, I learned a lot, I gained a lot of experience, but treat Magic Dog as sort of the evolution, as it were, of what we were. So we're no longer Catboy Games, we're Magic Dog now. This is our evolution. So this is our new form. And I'm looking forward to the future. We've got great projects. Me and my brother have been working on a video game for like close to 4 years now, kind of sort of off and on. So realistically, we haven't really been working for 4 years, and that goes the same with Rot, which is my tabletop game. Rot stands for Roll Only Two. I've been working on that bad boy off and on for 8 years, and this year, because of current world events, uh, I have had a lot of free time at home, and I've been taking this time to make a leap of faith and do work on my tabletop role playing game stuff. I figured that my tabletop stuff was what I would be able to finish first. And it's not to say that I didn't put a lot of work on the video game, because actually I put a tremendous amount of time on the video game that me and my brother are currently working on. That project is going under the name of Project Card Pug, and it's been kind of off at the moment. I haven't been able to give any attention to it, and that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But I've been working on the tabletop game. I've been putting a lot of hours into it. I've been it's been good stuff. It's been a lot of good stuff, and I'm really excited. And I've got two writers that are very excited to help me work on stuff, and we're planning on expanding Rot beyond what I just write, but to have my other writers also share with you these immaculate worlds that they've designed. Currently, right now, the world that I am working on is called Dorian. It exists in our setting, Machina and Magic, which is the fantasy-based setting. I'm not going to say that it's the run-of-the-mill generic fantasy setting, but it does follow a lot of standard JRPG tropes and follows a lot of D&D tropes. I would say that it's medium magic, so unlike traditional Dungeons and Dragons, which I would consider high magic, the world of Machina and Magic is more of a take on medium magic. The gods aren't so crazily powerful in the sense that quite a bit of them even exist in the world and walk amongst men. And I plan to have this done this year, which I know saying like, "Ooh, you've got November and December left," and yeah, you're right. I don't have much time left till the end of the year, but I'm that close to being done, and it's sort of a race to the finish. And I wouldn't say a race. I don't want to use the word race. Race sort of implies that I'm running or rushing, and that's exactly what I am attempting not to do. But of course, I have limited resources, and I need to complete this in a timely fashion. Um, The future for that, I've got a lot of stuff. The core rulebook, which is what I hope to have done, will have everything that you need to play Machina and Magic. It will have all of the rules. It will have a great portion of spells. It will have a lot of items, a lot of weapons. It will have magical items and treasure and some brief stuff on deities and some brief stuff on races. And it will cover a little bit of lore in places. But I'm not going to go super lore heavy on the core rulebook. And that's mostly because I've sort of designed it to be much in the sense of Dungeons and Dragons, where you can set it in any sort of world or environment, and you can use Machina and Magic for your worlds and how you want to play. Now I will be I will be making a setting book. That's one of the things I plan on making, and hopefully that'll come out relatively soon after. One of the other things I plan on making shortly after is a monster manual. The core rulebook will have a limited amount of monsters in it. Unfortunately, the book as it stands is massive, and which is great because there's tons of great information in there, and there's a lot you can do with it. And I am happy to say that this chunker of a book, which currently as it stands is 400 plus pages long, will have everything you need. I guess I'm taking one out of Pathfinder's sort of book design, in the sense that the player's guide and the dungeon master's guide are being slammed together into one core rulebook. So you will have all of that available. You will have traps. You will have environmental dangers. You will have lists for treasure, etc. All of that stuff. And it should be completely comprehensive in that regard. I definitely want to make a monster manual, like I said. I want to make an expanded Dungeon Master's Guide, and that will be useful because the Dungeon Master's Guide will have things for different setting-related things. So I'll have, early black powder weapons and cannons and the like in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and have some epic level abilities in the Dungeon Master's Guide, etc., and just some general rules that the Dungeon Masters can use. The other thing I want to make too is eventually, and just a matter of when, I'd like to create an expanded magic guide with more spells, etc. That'd be a lot of fun, and I definitely want to make setting related books. I want to create deity related books, setting related books. I want to create. I would really like to sit down and also create the colonies. There's in the world of Dorian, one of the major factions, the baronies of Constable, have colonies on the other side of the sea. And without giving an image, it's hard to explain what Dorian looks like, but it's very circular shape with a massive sea in the center. And crossing that sea is very dangerous, so a lot of ships curve around the center of the sea due to the deep Undyne and monsters and weather and all sorts of supernatural things. The center of the ocean there is very dangerous, and the colonies are a very interesting place because there's a lot of moral gray areas within the colonies, being so far away from the civilized world, and taking pages from colonialism and America's history and various other parts, and really trying to portray a story of the colonies and how rough it is to be in a new land, in a new world where the kings and the queens of the world aren't there to punish you for your sins and crimes and all that fun stuff. So I'm really excited about that. as soon as all of these things are done, the hope is between the two other writers that I have that we will be coming out with two other games, Retribution and Tarkon, both which we've sort of play tested. I say play tested, I mean, there's not terribly much to play test other than setting related stuff, but we would like to see Tarkon and Retribution coming out next year. Tarkon being a space western, sci-fi heavy style game built around survival, and Retribution being a black powder fantasy with focuses on grim fantasy and a world sort of torn up by war. And I'm very excited for both because they're both very well written worlds, and I am excited to see them in a physical form. Now we plan, and I mean this is my plan, I'm not exactly sure on my writers per se, but I would like that Retribution and Tarkon both be fully contained books. So much like with Machina and Magic, Machina and Magic is fully contained. It is a player's guide and a dungeon master's mixed. Everything that you will need to run that game will be in that singular book. And with Tarkon and with Retribution, I would like, if I can have it this way, I would like to have them as full, complete books. So you can jump, and that's going to be the beauty of it, since all three of the games will be using the ROT system, roll only two. It'll be very easy for players who have played Machina and Magic to jump into Tarkon, to jump into Retribution, and be able to pick up the game just fine. One thing I kind of want to describe about ROT, the system, is its difference from other systems. When I started ROT, I started ROT as essentially a very simple question. My question was essentially I was looking at a lot of these systems, like Deadlands, for example, that were bogged down with so many different actions because you're drawing cards and you're dividing numbers, and it can slow down the game sometimes. And I'm not saying that Deadlands is a bad game. Oh, on the contrary, Deadlands is one of my absolute favorite tabletop games that I have ever played. And if you've never played Deadlands and you like Western based games, like highly recommend that you play Deadlands. And but I was looking at games like that, and there was a sense of realism that like Deadlands had with the way things were handled with hit location and the way that damage was dealt, etc. And I was like, you know what? I like a game. I like a game where there's a sense of danger involved. Which, don't get me wrong, Dungeons and Dragons can be very dangerous in its own right, and games like Shadowrun can be dangerous in their own right. But in a world with magic and super tech, it ends up becoming very, very hard to die in a lot of instances. And I was trying to think, and I'm coming from a background of like World of Darkness and games like that, because I really love the World of Darkness games, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse. Love those games. Oh gosh, I'm a classic old school World of Darkness player, true and true. And I'm really digging 20A stuff too, 20th anniversary. And I'm looking at the simplicity of the storyteller system, and I'm looking at the complexity of systems such as Deadlands, and even Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 and Pathfinder, and I'm looking at the complexities of those even. And I'm like, there's got to be an in-between. There's got to be an in-between. Because with the storyteller system, don't get me wrong, great, amazing system. There is a lot on the shoulders of the DM in terms of having to make up rules sometimes on the fly, and there's very limited options depending on the game that you play. No, if you're playing vampire, you're playing werewolf. They're extremely established. They have a ton of clan books and a ton of tribe books. And there's a lot you can do in terms of gifts and disciplines and abilities, all those sorts of things. Very cool. I love it. But um, in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, you have all the feats. You have a lot of different feats and a lot of different abilities. And some of those feats and some of those abilities I've never thought were necessary. A lot of those feats and a lot of those abilities were actually kind of silly. I think the one that always made me laugh the most was halved. The ability to take your long spear and pull it back so you could attack at a 5 foot space. Anyone who's trained in a spear will know that you can attack with it at the reach position and you can attack it with it at close range depending on where you slide your hands. That's just part of the martial art training itself. There was never any need for it to be a feat. There was never any need for it to exist as a feat. And yet games like that do that, where they're bogged down with a lot of these minor rules that honestly shouldn't exist. So like, don't get me wrong. Um, Definitely don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good that comes from these games, and like Rot itself, my system is built on all of these games that I've played. I have taken all of this information and all of my all of my knowledge of game design, and I have created Rot. This is the child of so many different games and so much of what I have analyzed from games. So I really like the feat system with D&D and the spells, and I got really into like character building with D&D and Pathfinder, and I noticed with other players like character building is definitely fun. Some people really hate it. There's a lot of people that really hate it. There's a lot of people that want to go into the game and they're like, I don't want to be bogged down with having to build a character and having to min-max and do all that stuff. I don't want to feel like I'm not useful because I didn't build a min-maxed character. And I sort of wanted to keep that in mind too, but I felt like there had to be a balance. There had to be a balance somewhere between letting people build characters and have fun with the art of character building, but then also going into a game and then being like, okay, well, I didn't doom myself because I didn't take the right feats. I didn't doom myself because I didn't build my character correctly. So, like the ROT system, for example, like most modern tabletop games, does not use a level system. It's experience by for skills, abilities, feats, etc. So, and honestly, it's one of the, I think, in my opinion, the best ways to handle experience. Levels are outdated, in my opinion. And, you know, don't get me wrong. I understand why levels exist and why they did exist. But in this day and age, it doesn't really make any sense. Just like in real life, you don't just miraculously know a whole bunch of stuff because you level. And granted, a lot of those older systems expect you to perform some downtime in between levels so that you can accumulate the knowledge that you've gained and actually acquire the level. So, I mean, you can make sense of levels. Levels can make sense. But I have always been more of a fan of you work on a skill, the game master gives you the thumbs up or the thumbs down for when it's time for you to level up a skill, ability, or feat, etc. And you spend the experience and you gain the ability. That's what I've always been a fan of because it allows for a progression and a progression that it can exist logically within a story. So, I mean, if it's been if a chapter of a story has had mostly diplomacy, it's going to make sense that the fighter may pick up some social skills versus pick up fighting skills, especially if they're not doing a lot of fighting. But at the same time, the fighter could be like, you know what? I don't want to deal with all this diplomatic crap. So while the bard or the nobleman are going out there and they're being diplomatic with other people. The fighter could be training on the side with mentors or contacts or even by himself. And it's one of those things where it's like, if it makes sense in the story, then yeah, the game master approves and you level it up with experience. To me, that makes sense. That's why I liked it in World of Darkness. It's why I liked it in Savage Worlds. It's why I liked it in Deadlands, Shadowrun, all of those games, etc. Like, makes sense to me. That system to me makes sense. Levels barely make any sense because you have to create a workaround for them to make sense. You have to create the downtime. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Anyways, back to the point. I have gone on a ramble, but this is entirely intentional. Like I'm going on this as a ramble. So Rot made me ask a lot of questions. Some games are complicated in certain regards. Some games are too simple in certain regards. Some games have the concept of character building, which I really like. Some games have the concept of experience-based progression, which I really like. So I have taken all of these things that I've really liked, and I've put them together in a big soup. And then I said, you know what? I want one more piece of ingredient into this mix. And that piece of ingredient was a sense of realism. I needed a sense of grounding because realism creates grounding in tabletop gaming. One of the reasons why with Dungeons and Dragons, why hit points get weird is because hit points represent a lot of things going on. Your hit points are sort of like your endurance. They're sort of like your plot armor. They're sort of like your health. And if you fight just as strong with 100 hit points as you do with 1 hit point, to me that's never made any sense. Rot has a wound system, as do many more modern tabletop games. I'm definitely a fan of that. Definitely a fan of wounds. But it's one of those things like, man, I've really lost track, haven't I? It's really late right now. It's 5 a.m. right now as I'm recording this. So I'm actually pretty wide awake because I'm kind of just in the mood to jibber jabber here. But the concept of hit points get really, really weird. And I've created my own version of hit points and wound-based system for Rot. So... and I've taken the things that I've liked and the things that I don't. But like, oh yeah, there we go. I'm back. Hit points aren't grounded. They're not grounded in realism. You have to create realism out of them. You have to say, okay, well, your hit points represent your close calls. Your hit points represent the moment you almost got hit, or you did get hit, but you're strong enough to shake it off, etc. So hit points require a workaround to make it grounded. And that's very hard to do if you don't think of it that way naturally. So with Rot, I wanted a sense of realism and I wanted things grounded. So I did a lot of homework. Things on like fall damage and how long does it take for somebody with a 2 centimeter cut to heal. How at what point are you at risk of death based off certain injuries, etc. And I'm not saying that my system is the answer to realism in any sort of way, because it definitely isn't. Because if we created a system that followed full realism, we would we wouldn't have any way to play it. It would just take too long. And games like that are honestly better in something like a simulation. Hopefully one day in the future, possibly with some advanced VR, we can run a Dungeons and Dragons based game where we the players exist in that world realistically and have our abilities, and be in a different body, a very transhumanist experience being in another body virtually. I just want to make a very quick shout out to the people who made Eclipse Phase. I'm a little confused on the system. I've only played 3 sessions so far. It's very different. It's not natural to me, especially with reading the dice as they are. But the world, the world is amazing. I'm really engrossed into the world of Eclipse Phase. So if you haven't checked out Eclipse Phase, highly recommend it. It's very cool. Very cool. We just bought our book not terribly long ago. And one of the things I really liked about their book, I know it's like a completely minor detail, but it came with the book tassels, you know, like the bookmark tassels. It came with two of them, and I was like, oh, that's nice. You know what? That's nice. That's what I want in my book. And I don't know if my printer is going to be able to provide that for me, but I really liked that. It was such a little nice touch. Um, the book is fairly organized, which is something I can give over Shadowrun. Yeah, you heard me, Shadowrun. You heard me. Your book is a mess. 5th edition Shadowrun, my god. Don't get me wrong, I love Shadowrun, but hell, that book is a mess. The Eclipse Phase book is fairly organized. But it's a big info dump. So like if you're not used to playing tabletop games, or you know what, to be honest, even if you are used to playing tabletop games, like Eclipse Phase is a big info dump. It's definitely it definitely is not natural. Like for example, INT, the initials INT stand for intuition, and that's one of the things I haven't really been able to shake off because INT for me stands for intelligence or intellect. And you know, I see why a lot of older players stick to their old systems because, you know, learning a lot of new games is an info dump. And don't get me wrong, like Rot will be its own info dump. Like Rot will be its own info dump, I'm sure. I didn't make Rot particularly easy, but I made sure that I didn't make it harder than it needed to be. So that was one of the things I was going for when I was making Rot. I was like, okay, let's try to make things natural. Let's try to make things easy, you know. But I mean, you can do what you got to do. I'm very proud of Rot. I'm very proud of it, but internally it's like internally it's a struggle. I don't have much self-confidence in myself. I'm looking at these other books. I'm looking at these other books and I'm like, gosh, your books are so beautiful. These are some good-looking books. Eclipse Phase is one of them. Eclipse Phase is a gorgeous book. Oh, wow. They've got some good-looking books. Very capturing the imagination, and I like that. And I like that. Pathfinder and even Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 and you know even 5e Dungeons and Dragons have always had very good art. I like art that captures the imagination, but I think that Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons are pretty tame with their fantasy based art. In the sense that like it's not it's not as mind provoking of art. Which don't get me wrong, it's all completely gorgeous. And one of the things this is crazy. I'm going way out there now, but one of the things I really like, and this goes against every principle. This goes against every principle of art that I have been taught. One of the things I really like in especially I think Pathfinder does an amazing job, but 3.5 and 5e does a good job too, is I really like the fact that the adventurers in the books are carrying all of their gear in some sort of logical fashion. They've got the bedroll on their back, the scroll case on their side, the tankards hanging loose. And yeah, it looks like they might be a little encumbered, which is probably what's literally happening, but they've got everything there. All the pouches and the pockets and the belts and the straps and all of those things. And it stirs like the imagination that like adventurers have this need for like backpacking and the ability to keep all their things ready and able at a moment's notice. And they get really smart with their designs, and I really like that. You know, the way that they position the weapons and the way that they put like the crossbow on the back and how things are carried and slung around, etc. And it's very smart and thought provoking. And I like that. I definitely like that. I've always liked that. Though traditional art would be like, oh, well, yeah, that's too cluttered and that doesn't help things because, you know, there's no clear direction of what you're looking at. It looks like pure chaos. And really it's not. There's logic to it. But for traditional art it looks like pure chaos. Anyways, back on track. I tried to make rot a bit of everything. And I took all of my knowledge, and I took my basis of realism, and I dumped it in there. One thing I want to talk about. I'm going to get talking about this realism here. Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 had their math correct. And this is something that's bothered me with 5th edition. This actually literally bothers me with 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Because 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons decided that the math wasn't right. And the math wasn't good enough, so F the math. Booyah. Get out of here, math. They didn't listen to their former selves. Okay. Let's do movement, for example. Let's do movement. And I need to do some calculations here. All right. You might hear me typing away here. Okay. So, we have something like movement. All right? Movement in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and Pathfinder is that there's essentially multiple different ways to move. You've got your standard movement, which is a single move action. You move up to traditionally 30 feet. The average human is 30-foot movement. A human, elf, and orc go 30 feet. That's a typical movement. And of course, you can be a monk or a barbarian and get extra movement. Or you can be a halfling and have less. But traditionally, you have 30 feet of movement for a human. Unencumbered, no armor, none of that sort of stuff. Your standard movement's 30. Your double move action is twice that. Your full sprint is 4 times that. So if we do some math here, you're moving 30 feet. You're moving 30 feet per 6 seconds. All right. All right, so you do 30 divided by 6, because there's 6 seconds in a round. That ends up being 5 feet per second of movement. Now that's just for a single move action. That ends up being about 3.4 miles per hour. Now you're moving times 4 movement, so you're sprinting. So that ends up being 20 feet per second, and that puts you about 13 miles per hour, 13.636 miles per hour. That's actually pretty comparable to average speed for running. It's for a runner, it's a little on the lower side, but it's for an average everyday Joe that doesn't really participate in track and field, they get that much movement in running, 13.6 miles per hour. That's actually correct. We can take a look at effective range. That's another one that I want to take a look at, something that 3.5 has done correctly. Effective range of a longbow. I had this saved. Actually, I might as well just pull it. Historically, they're saying anywhere between like 150 to 300 yards. Okay. And the longbow in a D&D 3.5 has a range of 100 feet. Effective range of 100 feet. And we'll do the 200 yard assessment for a longbow. So we'll say that the effective range is 200. Essentially what they're saying is that within 100 yards, you'll be able to hit your target just fine, and you'll suffer a small amount of penalty within the 200 yards effective range. You'll suffer an even greater penalty when you exceed the effective range, and an even greater penalty when you exceed that even further. So they've actually taken the math, and it's actually pretty solid, because it's not just longbow that I'm checking here. I've got the numbers written in my notebooks, etc. But D&D has done their homework on the effective range of how throwing weapons are thrown, and how slings are thrown, etc. Like, they actually sat down and did this math. And that's for short bows, long bows. I don't know where they got their information, because during this day and age, like, when 3.5 was made, we didn't have all the YouTube channels. We didn't have all of these YouTube channels that we do today that have these people explaining all of these things. Like, I can hop on YouTube right now, and I can find 4 or 5 different people that will easily talk to you about bows, crossbows, melee combat, shield stances, fighting manuals, etc. And yet the people who made 3.0 and 3.5 were able to culminate this information, put it in mathematical numbers, and actually be accurate. And be correct. Like, to me, that impresses me. So we get into 5e. All right, we get into 5e. And one of the things that they do is they get rid of the times 4 movement. They get rid of the times 4 movement. Rounds are still 6 seconds, mind you. So one of the problems that first edition had was with their minute-long, or the early D&D renditions with the minute-long rounds didn't make any sense, especially with movement. Made absolutely no freaking sense. But, okay. So, in 5e, you take the full dash action, which is, you take your normal movement, and then you take a dash action, which is extended movement. And you end up moving 10 feet per second. I mean, the numbers haven't changed. 30 is the base number for human movement in 5e. 10 foot per second. 60 feet. 30 foot standard movement, 60 feet after dashing. You move a whopping 6.8 miles per hour. And I am very overweight and I am very unhealthy, but I assure you that I can beat 6.8 miles per hour in a full sprint. I assure you that I can. These numbers aren't right. These numbers are not at all correct. That is very upsetting. The longbow, they have changed. No longer is it that the first range increment is half of the effective range, but instead it's the full effective range is 150, or 150 foot range for longbow versus 103.5. So they're essentially taking the lowest number that they found for effective range for longbow, which I have seen as 150, and that's what they've made. You take no penalty during effective range, which, okay, take it or leave it. That makes some sense. But at the same time, their far range is pretty. Their farthest range is pretty long because of that. But take it or leave it. It is what it is. So I don't really fault them for that. But I feel like their former math, which was correct, they've completely disregarded. Because now the rounds don't make any sense with movement. Doesn't make any sense with movement. And it's weird too, because like a fighter can use action surge, and fighters can get ridiculous amounts of attacks, and you know how fast the human body can move. And granted, it's a fantasy game, and I get it. You can move faster than the average person, which is why action surge exists. But at the same time, you're able to make all of these quick melee movements, but you're only able to go half as fast as a normal person. It literally doesn't make any sense. Makes absolutely no sense. I just feel like 5e's missed on the math. That's just my take on it. That's what I get from observation. It was very exciting to see the math on 3.5, like getting involved in it. And I wish I had more examples like ready. I kind of made this video on a whim. I didn't actually write anything down to explain about the math of 3.5. But it's there, and it's actually pretty good. There's a lot of things I don't like about 3.5. There's a lot of things I don't like about a lot of games, but that's just being picky, and it's sort of why I took the time to make my own system. And I think that's a good good of reason as any to just go and make your own system. Oh, I get excited to see other people's systems. I get very excited, and I also get very excited to see how things don't end up being the way that other people want them. The way that like they think it's a good idea and then it ends up falling flat on its face. Iron Claw is a good example with their initiative system. It is the absolutely one thing that we don't do in Iron Claw is run their initiative system the way that they want you to, where you have the two different sides, where it's Team A versus Team B have their own initiative. And it goes against normal principles of initiative, and it's sort of just that thing. And people are like, well, it's not. I know other people that do the same thing. Other people that do not follow the Iron Claw initiative system because it's just that off. It's that strange and foreign, and it doesn't feel right. People like their initiative. An initiative system that feels kind of rewarding is Shadowrun. Um, I I think sometimes it's a little weird, but Shadowrun does have a pretty good initiative system. I almost feel like I should have done something crazy with my initiative system, but it all works out anyways with how I divided up rounds. So I couldn't really do anything more than what I had. I would have to restructure everything in Rot the way that actions and things are handled. Um, One of the things I've never liked and this is with a lot of basic systems is is the idea that you can only perform one action in a round. Um, in the case of like Dungeons and Dragons, quote unquote, you can perform multiple attacks, which okay can make some sense to a degree, but then like you can't perform other actions. You can't perform other multiple actions in a round. I don't know. Things kind of the idea of it. I like the ability to split actions. And it's fine in like in the case of Shadowrun where you have like in a round there's multiple initiatives that happen. You take your turn multiple places during the initiative. That's fine because you do technically get multiple actions in a round, and that's cool and whatnot. But I do like games where I'm able to split my actions and perform multiple things. And if it's at a penalty, then yes, it's at a penalty, and I feel like that's how it should be, because you're extending your mind to do multiple things. But there's a lot of games I've seen where it's like, well, you get one movement, you get one action, and you get maybe a free action or maybe a swift action, and it's like, well, this is kind of garbage because I kind of want to move up these stairs, pull a lever, and shoot my crossbow. And I know that's something I'm perfectly capable of doing since, I'm this crazy archer character of so high of a level, and can't do that because question mark physics. But then physics can get weird peasant railgun related stuff. Man, I'm drifting. I'm getting way off into off track land. I think that's my cue. I'm looking down and it's about 45 minutes this recording, and I've said a lot and my voice is starting to actually feel it. Like I'm starting to actually feel it. Like I don't think I've just went on a rant for like this long in a long time. And please stay tuned. I'm probably not going to make too many of these videos just because I'm just trying to get back into the practice of speaking and hopefully get myself ready for some up and coming videos. Just kind of one idea, and I'm going to say this before I end the videos. One of the ideas is that I will make a video series explaining rules explaining lore and explaining character creation with Machina and Magic. So we'll definitely make some videos for that. And I'm excited to make those. So sort of treat this video as me just practicing, just getting on the old headset and talking away. Yeah, this is just some cheap headset that my brother got for me, so it's like I'm not using any fancy equipment. I've got a lot of musician buddies with some pretty good microphones, so eventually when that time comes, I will get to that. But as of right now, you will have to deal with these cheap headphones. You guys have a good night. Check us out on Twitter at Magic Dog Games. Check us out on Facebook at Magic Dog. Check us out, you know, just about anywhere you can find us. Hit like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Until next time, this is Daleo signing out.